Okay, friends, with the beginning of fall, we are coming out of pollen season, though it will always be pollen season in our hearts, and I'm not saying that it is over forever, especially on this channel, but we are entering Benophie season, and based on some recent announcements, fall feels like a very apt time to talk about some of said announcements, even if we are still going to be waiting 2 years or potentially more for season 4. So if you are new here somehow while talking about Bridgerton, hi, my name is Melody. We talk about books and book adjacent things on this channel, and we do talk a decent amount about Bridgerton, and I am still kind of navigating what that is going to look like in this interim and the lead up to season 4. But we have a lot of news coming very speedily in the wake of season 3 in a way where I understand feeding that appetite and especially needing to make a lot of these announcements before season 4 starts to film. But at the same time, the part of me that knows we're going to be waiting a while for this season wonders if maybe we should slow down a little bit. But let's go ahead and look at some of the things that have come up or out about season 4, and I'm sure we can dive into all of these more in the lead up to season 4. So let me know what you're interested in, as well as your thoughts as we talk through some of this. Now, of course, the biggest announcement that I only touched on lightly in my shorts, I've only touched on any of this lightly in my shorts, is of course that it is officially Benedict season. We have all been invited to the Masquerade Ball. Put a pin in the Masquerade Ball. We will circle back to that a little bit toward the end, though not in any great depth. And so in wake of knowing this was Benedict's season, the question was, of course, who is Sophie? And we got the announcement prior to filming starting that Yiren Ha is officially our Sophie Beck for Bridgerton. And the way that she has talked about this role already is very interesting in that she has mentioned the kind of struggle that Sophie has from the very beginning, the class element, as well as dealing with these feelings for Benedict and what these feelings are going to be and going to mean. And with our Lady in Silver Sophie, which is notable because she is the Lady in Silver to Benedict in the book, An Offer from a Gentleman, and that seems to be carrying over to season 4, according to that marketing. But we also need her family, notably her stepmother and stepsisters, as this is the Cinderella story of the Bridgerton universe. And with that, we got some notable casting, particularly in relation to her stepmother, Araminta, which is the second such in the Bridgerton universe. And she is notably being played by actress Katie Leung, which kind of broke the internet a little bit when the news dropped, obviously hyperbole, but a lot of people of my generation were lamenting the fact that she could be old enough to play a character with not one but 2 daughters going on or entering the marriage mart during the course of the season. And to that, I understand the frustration. I didn't read as much into it on that level. More, I just thought it was a great indicator that this is going to be a really meaty role, which I'm very interested in because there is something really delicious, to steal a word I use quite a lot, in the portrayal of the stepmother, the evil stepmother. And I think it is particularly interesting in relation, in terms of the book canon especially, to look at her in relation to Mary from The Viscount Who Loved Me, and of course Kate's mother from season 2. And in the books I talk about how I really appreciate this dynamic because we see Mary, who is an upset of the wicked stepmother trope, before we see Araminta, which allows her then to really lean in to that almost campiness in a way in the book. But I assume, especially in the way that we built and fleshed out Portia Featherington in the show, that we are going to be doing the same with this character. And I anticipate it's going to be quite a meaty role, and I'm interested to see how that is going to balance with Sophie and how those conflicts are going to present themselves, because the climax of this book, the grand gesture of sorts, is one of my favorite moments in the entire Bridgerton series. So I'm very much looking forward to how that character will play into it. And of course we got the casting of Sophie's stepsisters as well. We have Michelle Mao playing Rosamund, and potentially most notably for me, we have Isabella Way playing Posey. And Posey is a fan favorite in the Bridgerton universe for Bridgerton readers, especially going back to the time the books were published. So I'm very interested in a universe that allows us to flesh these side characters out more than we had the opportunity for in the book. This was a character where people were kind of begging for her story. And so I think that's why she appears the way she does in one of the second epilogues. And so I am very, very excited for the potential of this character and how this dynamic will play out specifically with Sophie. And Sophie is one of my favorite characters in Bridgerton, so I'm very, very excited to see her come to life in this way. And it's now been a season since we have met a heroine organically through the course of the season. We were introduced to Kate with her season, and so we are going to be introducing a new character. And with that, I know there has been a lot of conversation and some strife about who is or is not returning for this season. And honestly, it's disappointing, some of the people who haven't been announced as returning, because I love those characters and I love those storylines. But I also think that a lot of it goes back to a lot of the commentary and conversation I had, even going back to the second season, in that if we are looking at this as a translation of a romance novel and a romance series, we know there are hiccups with that. We know that there have been tensions, especially in translation, particularly with season 3 and how we're looking at that storytelling. But the kind of hallmark, again, of that is the switch of focus. We can, again, debate how successfully that has been done, but we are adding a lot of people. And I, of course, like the idea of these reoccurring characters, but at the end of the day, our focus really does need to be on the central couple. And if we are going to ideally course correct from season 3, we will be returning a lot of that focus, which means that we may only see some of our fan favorite characters in kind of Easter egg moments like we do in the books. Now, I'm not saying this is how it's going to be. I'm not saying that's how I ideally always want it to be, but I do want Benedict and Sophie to have enough time for their relationship to breathe, especially because we are going to be building our relationship as viewers with Sophie from scratch. There is, of course, a lot of anticipation for her because she is Benedict's love interest. We have all of these people who have already been fans of the book, and we have all of the people who have joined as fans of the books since season 1 premiered. But from a storytelling perspective, we have to get to know Sophie, and like in the books, we switch points of view between our love interests, so we get to spend a lot of time with them. And so hopefully we will get to see a lot of that. Where I was kind of circling with this was this idea of kind of mirroring the relationships and family dynamics, particularly from like the Sharmas with the Becks, and how Sophie and Kate both exist within these families. There has always been a lot of talk of kind of setting families and comparing families, putting families and dynamics in conversation with each other, whether it be the Sharmas and the Bridgertons, whether it be the Bridgertons and the Featheringtons. And so I think this is going to be another opportunity for that. I also think it is really going to, I can see it or anticipate it complicating the idea of the evil stepmother a little bit. I think we are still going to get to relish in a lot of the evil actions of the stepmother that make Sophie winning feel so good, in addition to the fact that we just love her. But we are also very conditioned into a story like this. We know Cinderella stories in our bones, which is a strength and a weakness because we are already primed for these story beats, but also because we are already primed for these story beats, we have lived through how many iterations of a Cinderella story, and so they have to set themselves apart in some way. And so I think that there is going to be a little bit in combination with how the series really has been interested in kind of romanticizing and giving us an escape within the world of Bridgerton, but also wanting us to acknowledge and view the realities for women in this world. And so I think in particular with this season, we're going to see that, and we're going to see that from Sophie's perspective, with the kind of class tensions, but I think that we are also going to see that from her stepmother and what her stepmother has had to do and potentially had to sacrifice to get ahead. And so I think she's going to be a very interesting character to set up, especially against the likes of someone like Portia Featherington. Now, in terms of the world of Bridgerton, one of the most interesting things I've come across in some of the press releases about this season so far, and there has been a lot of press and PR for the season so far, which I'm sure is just the lead up to the filming of the season starting. But I just don't want us to get burnt out. If you promise not to get burnt out, we'll keep talking about it here. But one of the things that I found really interesting, both also in relation to how Yiren is talking about Sophie in some of these interviews and the conflict and struggle that is inherent in her character. And honestly, some of those quotes read a little vague, but I understand, I think from an acting point of view in particular, what she's saying. She's saying there is something for her to act inherent in this character, and there is this tension that I'm sure is really delicious to play because she's going to have these competing objectives and scenes of her head and her heart. And I think that that's going to be really interesting, combined with the undeniable chemistry between these two. Okay, let's talk about the photo shoot before I swing back to the world. Promise me you'll remind me to swing back to the world. But the photo shoot they released for the first day of filming, which I think is a little bit like feeding the masses, but also helping us get to know Yiren as Sophie again, because we are being introduced to Sophie as a completely new character, theoretically. This photo shoot was so good, particularly the photo where her hand is on his thigh. It's just a subtle little small touch that I looked at for way too long. But then circling back to the world, because looking at the colors of this photo shoot as well, I think also segue us into this discussion of the world, because they are very fall, and we could say, oh, it's because fall is coming up, but it's also because fall is coming up for the world of Bridgerton. So it has been discussed, Jess Brownwell has discussed in interviews, that we are kind of shifting the ton away from the spring we've known, particularly because that is the season for Bridgerton, into fall. And Benedict is an interesting character, and I think this is an interesting segue to keep the world interesting, because there was a lot of conversation last season about the world feeling somewhat stale. Like, we've seen these ballrooms before, which I both understand and kind of balked at the time, because that's what we go in for on some level, and I don't think, as long as it makes sense within the world and the story, that we have to change for the sake of always needing bigger and better. But at the same time, it's also kind of setting itself up as always needing bigger and better, and the kind of spectacle of it all, to the point where even I had these grandiose ideas and images of what I thought the spectacle of some of the Lady Whistledown reveals were going to be, that did not come to fruition. But we are going into fall for this season, so we've got this added layer of this class struggle, in that Sophie is an illegitimate child of a lord, at least in the book, and she has been treated, of course, as a maid by her family. She is the Cinderella. She gets a glimpse into the lavish life of the ton for one night at a ball and sees Benedict, and the rest kind of falls out from there, but it's not an easy road. However, it's also not a road that keeps us in the ballrooms for the majority of the story, because that's not where Sophie operates. And the show has already also set up that that's not where Benedict operates. And we already have a kind of lost Benedict going into this season in a way that I think is really interesting. We saw him kind of experimenting the last season, but I think we might be setting up him going to the house party where he runs back into Sophie. I don't know if that will play out exactly as it does, but these opportunities for them to meet and interact outside of society, so to speak. And so we see Sophie in the drawing room. I think that this will be an excellent opportunity to get to know Hyacinth better and set up Hyacinth more, as well, as she in the books is very close to Sophie, and I think there's opportunity there. But we have this potential to move outside of the bounds of society in a lot of ways. They're stressing again that Benedict is the bohemian brother, which honestly is more set up of him as an artist than we ever got in the book. Sophie just kind of discovered he was an artist and was a champion of him in his artistry in a way that his family didn't even know existed. So it wasn't really a fair fight. But I think that there's going to potentially be an opportunity for Sophie to see how he's lost his way in this thing that he loved and helping him find his way back to his artistic vision in that way. Some guilt from Violet from her side for not having seen that he had lost his way, or she is probably just waiting for him to come to her or to find his own way, give him that space. But there's the opportunity to have them at house parties, to get to see a slightly more devious house party. There's the opportunity to see them at my cottage, which I think that opportunity or that probability is very high based on another article I read that said that there's going to be a scene in this season to rival Anthony's moment in season 2. And I was like, Anthony's moment? Which moment? And they were, in fact, referring to the lake moment, which in season 2 seemed to be in conversation with the Darcy scene from Pride and Prejudice, which is actually, well, honestly, people fall in water a lot in Bridgerton, because in The Duke and I, both Simon and Anthony fall in the lake. So while Anthony does still fall in the river in his book, and then Benedict does bathe in the lake. Okay, so he doesn't fall, he bathes. So we're gonna have a like voyeuristic moment from Sophie. Spoiler alert, maybe. Spoiler prediction alert. So that indicates to me, because in the book that happens at my cottage. Now, does that mean they have to keep it at my cottage? Absolutely not. But I think that maybe it being outside of the season proper and being fall, being autumn, as we've been told that the show is transitioning into, gives the opportunity for them to exist outside of the bounds of society easier and to kind of slip through the cracks, and for their relationship to form and deepen outside of the bounds, and then having to face the realities of society. And by facing the realities of society, I mean Benedict facing the realities of society. We will see how he does. We have a lot of improvements from book Benedict in show Benedict, partially due to the fact that a lot of book Colin is in show Benedict, which is going to be interesting to see that translation then. But I will be interested to see how Benedict behaves in relation to Sophie in the show, because in the book, I ranted about it for a second, but I also think it's an interesting opportunity too in relation to this idea of how Benedict and Sophie are interacting with society, because we know Benedict is kind of over society, but then he meets a woman at a ball. And so there's just going to be a lot of layers to this that I'm really excited to see play out, whether we are at my cottage or not. I do think and hope on some level that we'll keep some of the my cottage stuff, because it is that bread and butter of romance, of a sick partner or a sick love interest and the other one having to help nurse them to health. So I do think there are good odds there. But I think ultimately I'm just really interested in the visual language. Well, I'm interested in a lot, let's be real. And I'm very, very excited for Benedict and Sophie. But in terms of like conceptually, I'm really interested in this idea of transitioning into fall and to moving the color palette and what all of this is going to mean. I'm still anticipating a lot of foliage. I do not think we will be left bereft in the foliage, but I'm also a fall girl. Whether it's just because I'm a Scorpio or not, we'll really never know. There's a lot to kind of think about already with this season, and we can potentially dive into any of this in more depth, or anything else we may want to talk about in more depth, but I did want to just kind of get some cursory thoughts out. And I will just reiterate too, because I feel like there's been a lot of discourse around a lot of things, and I really do try and stay away from it all so I can kind of maintain my own opinions. But as the show becomes even more popular, it gets harder to kind of drown out completely, and it's just the nature of the thing. Heck, I am here sharing my opinion, so I am part of the conversation. But one of the things that I love most about romance, and the opportunities of romance, and also the challenges of romance being told in this medium, is that we have kind of endless love stories. And so it stings to have to let go of a couple you love or I love and maybe not see them as much. But there's also just this ever kind of moving ability to experience new love stories and feel love in new ways and new iterations. And I'm very excited to experience new love stories. And I might find better words for that and expound on it later. My brain is admittedly kind of fried right now. But also, it's all going to kind of stem back. We're going to start with the old and move into the new. We seem to be kind of focusing the marketing kind of language around the idea of the masquerade ball, which is the world that we know of Bridgerton. And I'm so excited to see that realized, which does also kind of segue into another thing in terms of not being able to escape some of the conversation as easily, in that I inadvertently saw some leaked images of the masquerade ball. And I do not necessarily want to talk about those here because I also didn't necessarily want to see those images. I don't know how I'm going to engage with that kind of thing that I think is going to be a lot more prevalent in relation to this fandom. And it's hard because I want to be engaged in current conversations with all of you. I want to be giving my opinions, but also I want to be experiencing this thing I love and just started talking about because I love it in the way that I organically want to experience it. And I didn't want to see those leaks. I wanted to see it and experience it in the moment, or I at least would have liked to be given the opportunity to opt into seeing them. And instead I saw them while just casually scrolling threads. And that was kind of a bummer because that is a big moment visually. And granted, I don't have the full visual scene yet. And also the fact that they did leak it all, I don't know what's going on there. But I read this book when I was in high school. I remember reading it up at the circulation desk upstairs when I worked at the library. It was one of my favorite in the Bridgerton series when I was in high school because especially of the Cinderella element and especially the climax of the book, that kind of last scene, Sophie getting her moment. And so I kind of wanted to first experience that moment in all of its glory. And whether I would have changed my mind down the line or not, I don't know. I still could change my mind because I kind of just got a peek and like moved it along quickly, so I didn't take in more detail. But as of now, I think how I'm going to operate is I'm only going to talk about like official things that have come through either Netflix or out of the Bridgerton social medias through Tadam or through press that is very obviously in conversation with the marketing and PR team. And it's not necessarily doing that to like buy into the line, but I think it's very interesting because I think the marketing and PR of Bridgerton is as much a part of the narrative as the show itself in a lot of ways. And I'm very interested in the story that's being told. And I'm interested in how we're being kind of prepped for the way the visual language is going to change because change is hard. And I'm interested to see what this season is going to be. I'm excited to continue to talk about it. And like I said, we can dive into any of this at more length. We can do character studies. We can do explorations. I will probably ideally still swing back and talk about some season 3 things. As for right now though, I think I'm going to leave it at that because I need to finish packing because I leave for Japan tomorrow. So I will see you all later. Let me know again if there's any of this you would like us to dive into a little deeper, but thank you so much for being interested in what I have to say at all. Like and subscribe if you feel like it. Read something good. And yeah,